Hello, this video is a little different than normal. Today, I won't be painting. I'll be bonding resin. I'm starting off with some medium viscosity CA glue, and I am spreading it everywhere. The old shake and in and out. Okay, now I'm taking these cheap clamps and I'm clamping it together while the super glue dries. For the center, you can see I'm using a C-clamp. You want to make sure that the glue is making good contact. That's why all these clamps are necessary. And after everything dries, it is time to break out the rotary tool, vacuum, and a dust mask. I'm cutting a channel in the surfboard to bond this seam because if I don't, when the board flexes, it's going to crack. This bevel's giving me just enough room to fill this joint with the UV putty. It's going to make a much better seam that's going to be far less noticeable. The putty that I'm using today is by Fun Crickle. I should mention that while this is not a sponsored video, they did give me this putty for free. Also, the resin that I've printed this surfboard with. I'm using a sculpting tool to smooth this putty out. And here I am using a UV flashlight to cure it. It takes a little more time to cure than what I'm showing here, but honestly, it's not too long. And as you can see here, I'm using a random orbital sander to sand the putty. You don't need this, you can just use regular old sandpaper. But I figured I've got it, so I'm going to make things easy on me. I have now foregone the random orbital sander and I am wet sanding with 320 grit wet dry sandpaper, getting all the layer lines out of the surfboard. And there you have it. It's taken me a little time to get all the layer lines out, but I think it turned out pretty well. This piece here stays detached, and that's it for the surfboard. Now it's time for a seam that's slightly more delicate. The neck head seam. Again, using a rotary tool. A different bit this time. I'm creating a very similar chamfer to the one I did on the surfboard. This one just happens to be a bit smaller. Going over both surfaces. Just knocking that edge off. I'm going to need some room here to add in the UV resin. Here I'm taking a brush and cleaning that up. If it looks tight, and it's time for bonding. Again, CA glue to the rescue. A good bit of super glue on all the surfaces. Little wiggle wiggle to get everything in place. Let it dry, and after that, I'm using a little standard UV resin to fill the seam. A little toothpick here to smooth some of that out. And a UV flashlight. This is kind of a rinse and repeat sort of step. This isn't something you try to do in one layer. You do a very thin layer, cure it with a UV flashlight, and then do it again. You're going to need quite a few coats to bulk out the seam and cure in between coats. And at some point, I should mention that this figure is Chun-Li Beach version by Abe 3D. I'll leave a link in the description below. After that dries, I'm coming in with some 320 grit sandpaper. Again, this is wet dry sandpaper. Knocking that seam down as much as I can. You can see there are a few low spots, and you may need to come back in and fill those. Here I'm using a sanding stick. This is pretty common for Gunpla kits, and they're pretty helpful here too. Back to the wet portion of the sanding. Again, I'm just using 320 grit. I've honestly found that I don't really need to go higher than that. I know a lot of people polish to like 1,000 grit, which seems wild to me. Primer doesn't really want to stick to anything beyond 400 grit. So I personally just don't see the need to go beyond that. 320 seems pretty good to me. The only real exception being a clear resin that you're trying to get a like crystal clear finish on. And that's about it. This is my resin bonding and sanding tutorial. Hope you enjoyed it. My next video is going to be a standard painting tutorial. See you then. Again, a big thanks to Fun Cole for the putty and resin. Link below. Bye.